This is KCBD News Channel 11 at 10.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
It was a promise his defense attorney made in opening statements, and today, day 11 of the Hollis Daniels capital murder trial, the defendant took the stand to speak for himself.
As a jury is soon set to decide what his punishment will be for killing Texas Tech police officer Floyd East Jr. in October of 2017, he told them what he thinks he deserves. KCBD News Channel 11's Case Wilbanks has our continuing coverage.
Janice Daniels returned to the witness stand Tuesday for cross-examination by District Attorney Sunshine Stanek. Stanek asked her about the ideal childhood that she provided to her son, from travel to private schools and counseling that she'd offered to him. Stanek said witness after witness has testified to what a horrible mother you were. But I'm here to tell you this is not your fault. And Daniels didn't fault her either, as he took the stand in his own defense, saying he did have an ideal childhood but felt he was what was wrong with it. He described for the jury a self-inflicted depression that led to drug use and suicidal thoughts. He says the drug use grew from synthetic marijuana to acid, Xanax, even laughing gas he ordered off the internet. His defense attorney turned to his time at Texas Tech, including his decision to return for his sophomore year. He says he didn't want to go, but didn't want to stay at his parents' house, and he also didn't want to live. The defense then published a timeline of events on October 8th and 9th of 2017, and Daniels recalled what he could and couldn't. He remembers stealing a gun to use to rob Xanax from a dealer the night before, saying he planned to end his life with the hundreds of pills later that month. He had that gun with him when he later returned to his dorm to find Officer East and others. Daniels explained the gun was in his waistband when officers patted him down, but it kept falling in his pants and was missed. He continued to conceal it and thought he could flush it at the police department. Illogical thinking, he says, was caused by the Xanax he took. He told the jury he did remember asking Officer East about his children before he pulled the trigger. Daniels says he thought that would influence his thinking of whether or not to kill him, and also thought it would be the best thing for Officer East to think about when dying. Daniels says the rest of the night is a series of images in his mind and doesn't remember being questioned by police or calling his father. Daniels called this a terrible tragedy and, quote, "I think it is totally fair to say a life for a life." He said he doesn't want to die, but he just wants what Mrs. East wants, and he realizes nothing will make what he has done go away. Closing arguments will be Wednesday before the jury begins its discussions about whether to send him to prison for life or to death row. Case Wilbanks, KCBD News Channel 11.